Innovate. Accelerate. Move technology forward. The startup revolution is now.
Hello, and welcome to the Philippines Culture Study launch for Philippines Startup Week. We are so delighted that you've chosen to join us today. My name is Mattia Squire, although most people know me as Tia. I am the head of community and research coordinator at Fingerprint for Success. I have a deep love and respect for Filipino people and culture, and I'd like to share a bit about how I came to be here today. In 2019, I was invited by a member of the Australia Philippines Business Council to help build relationships between Australian and Filipino startups. Now, when I was first approached about opportunities to engage with startups in the Philippines, I decided to do some research and found that at the time, the Philippines was one of the fastest growing startup ecosystems in the world. So, of course, I jumped at the opportunity to get involved. Along this journey, I met Alma Argolloso, the special commercial consul here in Sydney, Australia from DTI, who has been instrumental in helping connect me and many others to the wonderful talent of the Philippines. And through my experiences of interacting with the local Filipino startup community, I was introduced to Carlo Calamon, the president and co founder of Startup Village, who I went on to host several events with, including the first ever Filipino Innovation Pitch Night here in Sydney, Australia, where we brought together Australian and Filipino startups to pitch. And in 2019, I flew to Manila for the first Philippines Startup Week. And I have to tell you now, I was absolutely blown away by the detail and the care that had gone into hosting what I count as one of the best startup conferences I have had the joy of attending. Now, my experience included that during one of the panels, I found that there was kind of this underlying sentiment that Filipinos were not as entrepreneurial as other countries and could not compare to other ecosystems. To which I responded, being the researcher I am, well, where's the evidence? Who says Filipinos are not entrepreneurial? And so that kind of began the journey of me wanting to research, well, are Filipinos entrepreneurial? So I want to start with the answer to that question that I had in 2019. I can now say with 100% science evidenced fact that Filipinos are indeed entrepreneurial. And today you'll find out exactly why. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering what exactly is involved in a culture map and why is it considered to be a first of its kind? Well, we spent over 3 years to get a large sample of thousands of Filipinos. We then ran the analysis, and what we were able to uncover was the unique work style of the Philippines workforce. Using our methodology, we were able to identify the 48 specific attitudes and motivations that illustrate the general working population of the Philippines work style. Now, when we refer to a motivation or a work style, you can consider this as an attitude, which tells you about how you feel or think about something, which acts as a filter of what you naturally do or do not pay attention to, honing and shaping your focus, which influences what you are interested in at work. And this is what defines your unique work style. These motivations also define what gives or drains your energy. 50 is the average, and anything below or above 50 is considered higher than the average population. To put it simply, the larger the circle, the higher the motivation, the more energy you get. The smaller the circle, the lower the motivation and the potential for you to be drained, or even in the worst case scenario, feel burnt out. So, to begin with, let's look at what are the highest motivations of the Filipino workforce. Here is a snapshot of the top 5 motivations. These are what Filipinos generally find the most energizing in the context of work. So we'll now dive into each of these to uncover exactly what this means. So firstly, let's start with concept, the top motivation of the Filipino working population. This is referring to how Filipinos may prefer to approach a new project or task. Those highly motivated by conceptual thinking will seek to clarify the purpose and spend time on understanding on what is the priority to identify what is going to have the deepest impact. When approaching a new task, Filipinos may ask plenty of questions to gain an understanding of where this sits in the grand scheme of their overall objectives before planning on how they will complete it. Next is a high motivation for seeing, which generally the data indicates that Filipinos will thrive from in person exchanges, video meetings, using like video recordings and messages rather than just text based or voice based chat, showing a presentation, graphs, or other graphics of the tasks and goals. These findings are actually quite illuminating for Australian and US cultures, who we know have a lot of distributed teams and work with the Filipino culture. And often with these distributed teams, projects and tasks are requested purely by email or text based messaging chat, and it's not aligned to how Filipinos might be naturally motivated. To find out how convinced someone is motivated by seeing is to ask them, hey, does this look right to you? And if they're motivated by seeing, they'll be able to tell you immediately if something doesn't look right. One of my Filipino friends shared with me from their perspective that Filipinos tend to lean towards the saying, to see is to believe. We want to have solid proof, something that can be seen and that is written. Next, we have the motivation for present. Ideas, inspiration, and energy are drawn from living in the here and now, being practical and realistic about the resources you currently have at your disposal, and taking a pragmatic approach to the here and now with a focus on the immediate impact. When working in a team, people motivated by present will be energized by day to day agendas or check ins to focus on what is most pressing to them in the moment. Evolution is the motivation that makes up part of the mindset for change. According to our data, generally Filipinos may prefer small improvements over constant changes to be motivated and successful. Evolution being in the top five shows that Filipinos are ready to embrace change and focus on how they can make change for the better. An example of someone motivated by evolution will be that in the event they notice a procedure is no longer efficient, they will likely offer a solution. Consistency is part of the motivations that influence people and how they like to be convinced or learn. People high in consistency will require others to offer reassurance constantly, as once will most often not be enough to sustain confidence. In our data, we found those high in this motivation may feel more anxious about getting things right, often never feeling quite convinced about decisions. When I asked a Filipino colleague of mine how they see this motivation playing out, she said that Filipinos will often want to be extra sure that we are on the right track when it comes to our decisions or conclusions. So we do a little self check every now and then to see if the decision we made, even 3 days ago, is still the best option. Now we know what is the most motivating for the average working population. Let's find out what is not motivating. Here is a snapshot of the lowest five motivations, which, like our top five, we're going to explore together. The first of the lowest five is indifference, which is part of a group of motivations that make up how we see rules. Indifference is having low awareness of the rules and not paying attention to how others conduct themselves. Based on our data, the Philippines working population generally has a low motivation for indifference, meaning there is a high awareness of the rules, values, customs, and expectations within the culture. Examples of this may be that it is normal to attend church regularly, to honor traditions, and to have deep respect for family and the elderly. These are seen as universally understood by the majority of Filipinos. This is also an asset when it comes to diplomacy and respecting the rules and customs of other countries, making it easy for Filipinos to settle in anywhere around the globe. Next, we have sameness, which is part of the motivations that make up how Filipinos see change. It is the level of energy for keeping things the same, such as routines and identifying similarities. In our data, we discovered a low motivation for sameness, and as you may recall from earlier, a high motivation for evolution. This means that rather than keeping things the same, it is much more energizing to focus on what can be improved. An example of this desire for innovation in the Philippines is the investment in building a robust startup ecosystem through the implementation of such policies as the Ease of Doing Business Act, which streamlined government processes, systems, and procedures, and the Innovative Startup Act. Solo environment is one of the motivations that relates to productive working environments. It is being energized by working alone, uninterrupted. We found in the data that there was a low focus on solo and a bias for group environment. Now, if you've ever worked in a Filipino office and it's someone's birthday, you'll see this group environment in action, where everyone chooses to stop, come together, and celebrate, often with really, really good food and song. Money is a motivation that relates to what people find interesting in the context of work. In our data, we found that overall there was a low focus on financials. Knowing this highlights an opportunity to provide more programs or resources that help people access financial knowledge. In startups, our motivation for money was found to be one of the most critical points of difference between startup success and failure. And lastly, period of time is a motivation that pertains to how someone is convinced. It refers to needing a specific amount of time, whether that's 24 hours, a week, 2 days, to have passed to feel confident about a decision. In our data, we discovered a low motivation for period of time. We found that the priority was on how something looks, whether it looks right to Filipinos, and proving consistent results rather than needing a set period of time. So now we understand what is most and least energizing. What else can we learn from this culture map and the data within? We can determine the likelihood of success in early stage startups and mature stage ventures. How do we know we can do this? Well, in 2016, we did a world first study on founder mindsets, and in 2018, we partnered with Startup Genome. Using the same methodology from our 2016 study, we studied founders across 55 cities and validated our findings. And it is through this groundbreaking research that we were able to identify the entrepreneurial talents of the Philippines' working population. In this culture map, we benchmark the Philippines against the success factor models we built from our research findings. In our startup success factor model, we identified 5 motivations critical to startup success and 5 motivations that are correlated with startup failure. We categorize these success factor models into benchmarks, and there are 3 types. The green zone, which is complete alignment to startups who were successful within 5 years and exited from anywhere between 6 million to 1.2 billion. The orange zone in the cautionary ranges, just outside the green zone, with a risk of becoming a blind spot. And the red zone, which we refer to as a blind spot, where without awareness is correlated with startup or business failure. In the benchmark, we can see that the Philippines placed in the green zone, so the ideal level of motivation, for 31 out of 48 motivations. That's right, 31 quantifiable motivations aligned to startup success. There were 11 in the cautionary ranges and 6 in the red zone considered to be blind spots. What we will be uncovering now is where the Philippines sits in the benchmark for the 5 most critical motivations correlated with startup success. But before we get started, it is important to note that blind spots are not a measure of capability. It is a representation of the amount of energy or focus directed to a motivation. It is an attitude or behavior and therefore is not static. So the good news is that it means understanding blind spots creates a unique opportunity to build entrepreneurial mindsets as they can be cultivated over time with the right knowledge and guidance. So, firstly, by comparing the average Philippines working population, generally we can see from the data that there is a lower preference for breadth, which is one of the top 5 critical motivations correlated with entrepreneurial success. Breadth refers to big picture thinking, being visionary and moving rapidly between different concepts and ideas without being held back by needing too many details. For founders, this motivation helps to notice patterns, innovate, and think big. A higher motivation for breadth would help Filipino founders to think global and communicate their vision to investors. The average Filipino working population places within the ideal ranges, so the green zone, for power. Power makes up part of the mindset we refer to as influence. It is the motivation for being comfortable to step up and take charge, influence others, and be in control of people, resources, and things. Strong leadership is essential in building a high growth venture, with successful founders being on average 33% more motivated towards being in control and influencing outcomes than the average population. Next, we have internal reference, which makes up part of the mindset for authority, which influences how we make decisions. In our data, internal reference placed in the orange zone or cautionary range, where it has the potential to become a barrier to entrepreneurial thinking. Internal reference, or what we also refer to trusting your gut, is critical in early stage ventures. It influences the amount of confidence and trust you have in yourself and your decisions. An example of how internal reference benefits founders is Canva. Founded by a Filipino, Melanie Perkins, in Sydney, Australia, Melanie received over 100 rejections, but she trusted in the product she was creating and believed it was worth investing in. They persisted and became the tech giant they are today. Without confidence in herself, her decisions, her idea, she may have given up at the very first rejection. Initiation makes up part of the mindset for action level, which refers to whether someone is motivated to start fast or think things through before taking action. Our data found that generally the average working population placed in the red zone for starting fast, making this a significant blind spot. Successful entrepreneurs are on average 40% more motivated for taking action than the average working population. One of the most critical differences in entrepreneurial thinking in early stage startups is the speed at which you can go from idea to action, enabling you to maintain the momentum needed to attract investment and experience high growth. As we covered earlier in our data, we found that overall there was a low focus on financials. In startups, a motivation for money was found to be one of the most critical points of difference between startup success and failure, with successful founders being on average 43% more motivated than the average population to know the magic numbers needed to understand how to make their venture profitable and attract investment through convincing financial modeling. Now we know where the average Filipino population sits in the benchmark for early stage startup success. Let's take a look at our second success factor model. Business building, or what we call scaling up, refers to individuals that profitably grew a business over 10 years or more. Following the same categories, we can see the Philippines was in complete alignment to business success in 40 out of 48 motivations, meaning at this current time, the Filipino workforce is more motivated and aligned to building businesses over the long term rather than starting and exiting within 5 years. Now we can also look at how does the Philippines compare globally? One of the unique aspects of this culture map is that through our collective research, we are able to analyze and compare cultures between different countries and identify the standout motivations globally. The Philippines has an extraordinary culture, scoring the highest globally for consistency, tools, and procedures. This speaks to the Philippines' talent for being resourceful for which tool, technology, and process to use to achieve the most accurate and consistent results. Now, if we turn our attention to where the Philippines scored the lowest globally, we can identify an interesting pattern between scoring low in internal reference, which remember is confidence in decision making, yet high in consistency, which is the need to double check and never being quite convinced. In our research, we found this pattern can result in a lack of confidence in decision making. It appears rather than trusting a gut feel or making intuitive decisions, confidence is gained by supplementing this criteria with information and procedures. In our research, we also compared the Philippines' results with those of other cultures and found that the Philippines shares the most affinities with India and Malaysia, meaning the Philippines would experience greater ease of working and doing business with these countries. Based on the insights we've gained from the data and science, the Philippines is already a top 25 emerging ecosystem globally, and there is a huge opportunity to further accelerate Filipino talent by fostering and developing a curriculum across school systems, universities, government, and VCs to systematically develop the following mindsets: big picture thinking and being comfortable with ambiguity, trusting our ingenuity, belief in our founders, and trusting in the talent of the Philippines without having to look elsewhere, moving quickly without needing to have it all scoped out, removing systematic barriers to funding, education, and investment, getting comfortable with talking about finances and understanding the importance of knowing how to navigate profit, loss, and preparing for investment. This may be in the form of programs that help leaders, founders, or students learn how to evaluate business margins, profitability, opportunity costs, assets, and liabilities, increasing their commercial acumen. Now is the most exciting time to be investing in the future of the Philippines' working population. The Philippines government has already made a number of regulatory reforms alongside DTI's Competitiveness and Innovation Group, which is dedicated to growing and developing the Philippine innovation and entrepreneurship and startup ecosystems towards generating more and better opportunities for employment and entrepreneurship in the country. With the findings in this culture map, there are opportunities to further partner with our team at Fingerprint for Success and to collaborate with DTI and other key ecosystem players to enhance access to programs, resources, and support, accelerating the development of Filipino talent and building entrepreneurial mindsets. I want to wrap up this research with a Filipino proverb I came across that I think really suits the sentiment of being confident and stepping out of your comfort zone. Now, my Filipino colleagues have told me that I say this well, but I think they're just being nice. But I'm going to give it a go. Sa taong walang takot, walang mataas na bakot, which means to a fearless person, no fence is too high. Maraming salamat po. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my team for questions, and thank you so, so much for your time.